In this video, we're going to review the process for requesting overtime, getting that overtime approved by my supervisor and my deputy director, then recording that overtime on my timesheet and validating the overtime, certifying the overtime using a 682 form, and then finally submitting my timesheet for final approval. So the process begins with the request overtime link, which is here in the lower section of the timesheet. If I click that link, the first thing the system is going to ask me for is what period of time am I going to work this overtime. In my case, that's going to be here in the current month, which is January. So I'm going to leave it the default selection of January and click Next. The system's going to give me a form that looks a lot like a timesheet form, but that really only has a space for me to record my overtime request. You can see that the event is type here defaults to overtime cash. That's almost always going to be the type of overtime that we're going to use. And so then I just need to put the number of hours that I plan to work. I'm planning to work 3 overtime hours on Friday the 5th of January. And then with every overtime request, you are required to enter some details that explain the overtime. As you can see, the text in this request details box will tell you the things that you need to enter. You're required to put the period of time, sort of to and from hours that you're planning to work, the reason for the overtime, the work location that the overtime is being performed. And in the case where you're working overtime on behalf of another program, you need to attach an email that documents the agreement between the deputy directors that overtime should be worked. So I'm going to just paste mine in here. I'm working, as I had indicated down here, I'm working on the 5th. I'm planning to work those 3 hours between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. The reason for the overtime is that I'm going to do some testing on the new daily log system, and I'm working that. I'm going to perform that work at headquarters. So that's really about all I need in the request. I can go ahead and save that and submit it. And I need to certify that I am digitally signing this request and that it's valid. And the system will check the document to make sure it looks good, and then it will be submitted. And at this point, that's all I need to do. What's going to happen with this request is it's going to be routed to my supervisor. My supervisor will either approve it or not. If the supervisor were to reject it, it would come back to me, and I'd get an email indicating that it had been rejected, along with the reason it was rejected. If it's approved by my supervisor, it'll go to the deputy director, my deputy director, who will then either approve or reject it. And assuming it's approved, then it's going to flow directly onto my timesheet, and we'll have a look at what that looks like next. Okay, we are back, and you can see I'm logged on to Tempo here, and you can see from the portal that my pre-approval request has been approved. It is now the day of my overtime. It's January 5th. So I'm going to go in, and I've just completed my work day, and I am happy to tell you that I had planned on working 3 hours of overtime, but I actually got my work done in a little less time than I had anticipated. So I actually only worked 2 hours of overtime. So what I'm going to do here for the 5th is record my time as follows. I worked my normal 8-hour day, and then I worked 2 hours of overtime. So I'm going to charge a total of 10 hours. And you can see down here that the system has automatically pre-populated for me my 3 requested hours of overtime for that day. Now, as I say, I only worked 10 hours, that is to say 2 hours of overtime. So I need to correct that entry and change it to reflect the actual number of hours that I worked. So I'm going to simply change that 3 to a 2. And then I'm going to use the add comment feature here to simply document that fact, I'm going to say, got the testing done in 2 hours instead of the planned 3. That way, my supervisor will see that note and will be able to immediately understand that that I worked less than what I'd requested. So I'm going to save that. I still have one more thing that I need to do to certify this overtime, and that is that I need to fill out and submit a 682 form. So I'm gonna fill that out, and that paper form, and I'm gonna send it to my supervisor, and my supervisor is presumably going to approve it, and then I'm going to attach it. So I've filled out that form. I'm going to give it to my supervisor in the morning, and we'll come back and see what that looks like when I get it back from my supervisor. We're back once again. It is now January 10th. I submitted my 682 form to my supervisor, and I have got it back. And here's what it looks like. You can see that it has my name, my position number, the work location and organization that I work for, my work week group. And importantly, it has the date and from and to times of the overtime that I requested, the total number of hours that were authorized, the fact that I'm going to get paid for that overtime rather than get compensatory time off. And then you can see that it shows the actual number of hours I worked as 2 rather than the 3. You'll recall that I was able to get the work that I had planned to do done in 2 hours rather than 3. So my total actual overtime hours are 2. Again, I have the reason for the extra hours down here. And I signed and dated this on the 5th when I worked the overtime. And my supervisor has now signed and dated it and returned it to me. I've taken a scan of that document and put it into a PDF here. And what that's going to allow me to do is go ahead and attach it to my timesheet. So I'm going to click the attachment link here. And then I'm going to browse. And I have my signed 682 form from the 5th right here. And I'm going to click the add link. I'm going to get a little warning that tells me that there's certain kinds of things that I shouldn't be attaching to my timesheet, like confidential medical records, but this is definitely not one of those. So I'm going to go ahead and attach. And there's my signed 682 attached to my timesheet. I can save that. And at this point, the process for requesting and adding that overtime to my timesheet is complete. I'm going to now continue with the rest of the work for the month of January. And at the end of the month, I'll submit it, and that overtime will be documented correctly and completely as it should be. Just to review, the process that we went through was submit a request for overtime online using the daily log. Have that request approved by your supervisor and your deputy director. Once you do, that approved overtime will appear automatically on your timesheet for the period you're requesting that overtime. When it comes time to work that overtime, if there's an adjustment needed, if you need to adjust the number of hours down from the number you requested, you can do that. I suggest you make a note in the comments that indicates that you worked those hours that were fewer. And then the last piece you need to do is to get a 682 form signed and attach it electronically to your timesheet. And then at the end of the month, you'll be ready to submit your timesheet. So that concludes the video for submitting and requesting overtime requests. Thank you for your attention.